hi everybody, thanks for attending. My name is Jeroen van Meeuwen, and I'm a long-term Fedora contributor, and a long-term Red Hat cuddler, and ask-itser. So while I have this session on the OBS, please keep in mind that I'm biased. And so not all of the things that I'm going to say are fair. And a lot of the things that I'm going to say may sound negative. I think somebody suggested to get a crate of Rotten Tomatoes to throw at me for some of the things that I'm going to say. Anyway, so let me explain a little bit of the background of where I come from, who I work for, and why we have an OBS in a private instance as well. We're not using build.opensuse.org. And so there's a lot of things that, well, are necessities that we have to deal with. I work for Kolab Systems, and Kolab, as you know, has had its summit just yesterday and the day before. And we distribute basically an add-on repository for all of your favorite Linux distributions, including CentOS, Red Hat, openSUSE, Debian, Fedora. There's some people doing some ARM stuff for, I think it's Arch Linux, and there's some people doing Gen 2 stuff as well. But we're out there, right? We're an add-on repository. We don't restrict it to any one particular distribution. And so we have to support all of them. Ooh. That's difficult to do. Certain requirements that are contracts that Kolab Systems has to deal with, so our customers, require us to have the ability to control code that ends up being a part of the product, as well as the build process, as well as the result of such a build process. And that is actually one of the main reasons we employ our own build system, to keep it in-house. As well as we have a lot of people that have a lot of experience in packaging for your specifics, your Fedora, CentOS's, extra packages for enterprise Linux. And so some of the things that we noticed in build.opensuse.org are not necessarily on par with what we expect this repository space to be able to build against it. And there's probably like a variety of other reasons why we run our own. And I may or may not touch on those while I have this presentation. Well, while I have this session, I should say. I'm not really entertaining a presentation here. Okay. So, it's very clear to us that we need to run our own. So if you have any questions on why we do that, please just start shouting. I can explain all of that, but it's not necessarily the purpose of this session. Running our own, however, has gotten us closely acquainted with some of the awkwardness that might be displayed in OBS. It has created some problems for us. So I need to start this off on the right foot and say, awesome job, great stuff. Love having the OBS. For this enables our community members to contribute to the packaging for some of the platforms that we're not necessarily focused on, and so we're not necessarily spending a lot of resources on, and they themselves can fix up like the packaging for Debian, right? Like I said, I'm a Fedora user, long-term contributor, not necessarily focused on Debian, not necessarily as familiar with Debian, or openSUSE for that matter. And so people from those communities that actually use Kolab on Debian, they get to contribute to exactly that, right? They get to contribute their expertise, their familiarity with their operating system, with their Linux distributions, at zero cost to us, right? So it's very valuable for us to have a system like the OBS running so that community contributors can step in and scratch their own itch. in that way, everything is perfect. The universe is perfect. So that being said, I am now going to go through some 30 constraints I think ought to be addressed for the long-term future. I've once suggested to my boss that I take a sabbatical of about a year so that I can work on a proper build system. And it's still on the roadmap someplace. So, some of the problems. The way that the resolving works of dependencies, and so this includes build dependencies, does not reflect in any way the resolving that happens with the native tools. So be that your apps, or be that your yum, or even be that your zipper. This is, as I know from personal experience, a very complex space. But I think it's attempted to be resolved by a singular utility in the OBS that represents all of the logic throughout the native tool space. And so I think that is a fundamental problem that may need to be addressed, and I think some of it is in libsolve, right? That openSUSE created, or SUSE created, that is being adopted by tooling in the Fedora project as well. I think that is majorly important. I think that's a very good thing for us, Fedora, to have, adopted and worked with you, and for libsolve to benefit from that, and therefore solve that problem once and for all. But in the OBS currently, I need to specify a lot of package names to be installed into a root, a build root, and I need to start ignoring a lot of packages because my packages, for example, if I require an SMTP server for whatever reason, then the current resolving will say, oh, but I have multiple providers of the RPM capability SMTP server. However, if I zipper install SMTP server or yum install SMTP server, those utilities will choose whatever they prefer. So in yum, this is basically the shortest name. The shortest name wins, right? And the highest version wins. I don't know how this works in zipper. But so those capabilities of those native tools are not being reflected in the dependency resolver that is used within the OBS. Another part that comes in there is file-based dependencies, right? So I cannot require bin Python, for example, because that is not being resolved by the OBS dependency resolver. So this builds kind of like a problem space, I think, and again, I'm biased. So this builds a problem space where I need to start writing specs, RPM specs. Let's talk RPM, right? Because Debian is RPM specs where I specifically need to insert lines that make my specification incompatible with the Fedora packaging guidelines. So I now need to do it twice. Right? And the purpose of the OBS was to do it only once, and then have it apply across the universe. Yes, so, and I'll get back to that, right? So he says both of those problems you can resolve by changing your project configuration, which is, yes, you're entirely right. It's also something I will not want to touch. I will specifically not want to morph the OBS project configuration and create something unique to myself, right? I'm trying to avoid needing to create something unique for myself because I want my product out there, not just out there. So it's been suggested for many of the things that I start changing project configuration and such and so forth, but I want to keep it vanilla on purpose. So that being said, other items than just what I choose to ignore for a build root or what I choose to prefer for a build root also make my spec files incompatible with the upstream packaging guidelines. So I suppose we'll get back to some more of those items. So some of you may or may not have been in conversations with certain either Red Hat employees or otherwise Fedora contributors on why the Fedora is not using the OBS. Have any of you raise your hand if you've spoken on this subject before? Yes, there you go. Thank you. So, while I cannot speak on behalf of those that may have answered your questions, I think I do understand why they can be using the OBS. So, Red Hat specifically, and Fedora contributors alike, are very happy to have the concept of reproducible builds and not have to bootstrap a build root. The way that a build root is populated in the OBS, though, is basically bootstrapping. Dependencies are deliberately broken. Dependency cycles are not resolved. They're deliberately broken. And so the perception is that what you start out with when you start building software is a broken build root. So again, maybe some native tooling could help here, right? So the way that I suppose it's a mathematical problem, yes. But so the way that the native tools work, they install a little bit extra, right? Rather than just having the essentials, they install extras in order to break the cycle. So additional RPMs in this case, you do not necessarily need for the build, but you do need to resolve the dependencies. Yeah. But so, yeah, the build system in Fedora, Koji, right, is a management utility around mock, and mock uses yum. So it's entirely based on the native tooling and also then the tooling of the target platform, right? The version tooling of the target platform, not the providing host, if you will, of such a build root. So this brings me to actually one of the items, item number 13. We're having a pace here. It's skipping all over the place. So yeah, populating a build root and interpreting a package's build dependencies or dependencies happens on a host system and not inside the root. When the root is created, it's created by a perpetual state of brokenness. And so what I built my packages in, what I built my software in, is perceived as being broken before you even start building. And so this is one of the problems I would love to be able to address and resolve. It would certainly help me, not specifically for Kolab, but because I have a proper understanding of the Fedora build space and yes, and I suppose there's a variety of other options I should also be enabling and entertaining, like federated services, but I'm not. So I'm not in the business of building packages, right? I'm in the business of writing software and providing you with some freedom to do Groupware yourself. Take your data and run. So the packaging that we do, and specifically in the OBS, is the tooling here, but the packaging that we do is entertaining the community edition of Kolab. Oh, yeah, sure. He said it wasn't so much a question as a remark. He said you can use mock for building, so. Yeah. So, yeah, none of this makes me an expert in the OBS, by the way, right? So, I'm an expert in RPM packaging, that's it. I'm actually what was previously called an Uber packager in the Fedora project, so I have access to commit to all of the packages, including openSUSE and kernel stuff. It's now called a proven packager. So I have about 180 packages in Fedora that are to my name, including Ruby itself and a lot of that space. Yeah. Sorry? No, we need to talk about Ruby. I might, is there another session right behind me, or can we just? All right, so that having been said about build routes and the way that dependencies are resolved, which I consider, did you have a question? Did somebody raise their hand? Or? Okay. That's fine. No questions is good either. So, it brings me back to one of the reasons we run our own OBS. Build.opensuse.org may import a CentOS 6, which is fine, but I also need the updates. I need the point releases, if you will, and I think, you know, importing point releases would already be fair enough. But yeah, I don't myself. I don't import the point releases. I just continue to re-import updates, right? So, why do we need that? Well, as I may have mentioned before, we have cuddled up with Red Hat, and we're in that space for a very long time. And so sometimes there's software bugs in the base operating system, and I buy one of my friends a beer, and so this issue gets resolved, and I need that to be provided within my build system. This is not something that build.opensuse.org is currently entertaining. It could. Technically, there's no problem, I think, in entertaining it, but it's not currently entertaining that. Aside from that, we also need a special repository called Extra Packages for Enterprise Linux that contains some of our build dependencies for some of the stuff that we do. And I don't believe that build.opensuse.org entertains the Extra Packages for Enterprise Linux repository. You're not allowed to? So he's saying we're not allowed to import extra packages for Enterprise Linux?
It's only about the original packages from Red Hat, and we can only put there the packages which are on the media, the DVDs, but we are not allowed by the license, or in general, you are not allowed by the license of a Red Hat network to redistribute the binaries you download from there. So, and so far I asked the Red Hat people sometimes to get an exception maybe for us, but so far we didn't got that.
So in some ways I can call bullshit, because I don't believe that. I'll agree that Red Hat will say that, but I might have another fight to pick with Red Hat over that. And second of all,
bring the permission up for that, and no problem, we had it.
Sure. And then second of all, I can guarantee you that CentOS is the enterprise Linux you can use to build packages for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, right? Being intimately familiar with those processes, I can tell you, you do not need to import or have a build target that is Red Hat Enterprise Linux if you already have a build target that is CentOS. I'm sorry? CentOS can be built for power, though. Yeah. No, okay. Yeah. Yeah. You can rebuild the CentOS sources. That's correct. Yeah. So, but that being said, maybe Red Hat put some conditions forth that are not necessarily compatible with the licenses that the software are under. This is about trademark, right? So. So that being said, that still doesn't address the space of extra packages for Enterprise Linux, which are volunteer community contributors maintaining that repository, and so Red Hat has no say on it, right? So, and we do need that repository for some of our build dependencies. It would be lovely for build.opensuse.org to start entertaining extra packages for Enterprise Linux as a part of the build target that is your Enterprise Linux build platform or target platform. Did somebody want to make another remark? Oh, I thought I heard something. Must have been between my ears. All right, so where do I go next? Well, let's see. Let's talk about one of the awesome features of the OBS, if you will entertain this. So one of the awesome features of the OBS is whenever I submit an update for the packaging of a build dependency to other packages, the dependent package is rescheduled, right? It needs to be built again, most likely, not always. Certainly for stable releases, it doesn't need to be rebuilt, but the automatic scheduling of builds and rebuilds is a lovely feature where Fedora has a large freaking question mark about how they resolve this themselves within a build system called Koji. And so I help them sometimes with solving that problem. But this is a lovely feature in the OBS that would especially, service a rawhide in a Fedora 22 in testing, where, people need to start fixing some GCC, and then everything starts rebuilding, or fix some openSUSE, and everything starts rebuilding against that. So this is a lovely feature that I use and abuse 6 ways from Sunday. That being said, it also builds a little bit of a problem space because the rebuilding is basically scheduled unconditionally. So I may have a typo in a changelog of a spec file, but when I submit that, everything that depends on it is being rebuilt. And so this very simple fix that has nothing to do with any sort of symbols or any sort of compiler flag changes or any sort of files that I start shipping or did not ship before or whatnot, they will trigger a rebuild. And so in extension to that, if I change the spec file, also the Debian builds start rebuilding. Yes, they do. And so this might be exemplifying our add-on repository being one project targeted at many platforms, whereas I think most of what I've seen in build.opensuse.org is targeted towards one platform. And so we do these broader builds, and so maybe speaking as an ISV, I have a problem that hasn't been, my use case is just different. And so I want to speak a little bit about how we think this automatic rescheduling of builds might be resolved within the Fedora project. I'm speaking to speculative because I've only been involved with the drinking of beer with the people that are supposed to address this problem space within Fedora, right? So the reason that you rebuild something if something is updated is because either symbols change, some API type of incompatibility, or, and I'm bastardizing the problem space here, but, or you do not really need to rebuild stuff. So the way that we think it might be addressed within the Koji space is by start doing symbol resolving and establish a difference there in order for the logic to determine that other stuff needs to be rebuilt. Now, this is major computing effort, right? You're not nodding. You're shaking your head. What are you thinking? All right. He says that's for later discussion over lunch.
In other languages, for instance, if you have a Go package, everything gets statically linked inside. So you need, so it's or then there are doc generators, which and other packages read metadata and converting it, and you don't want to have a resolver for each kind of package. So it's you.
Yes. Yes and yes.
Yeah, and when you want to be on the safe side, then you have only the choice to
I completely agree, and so hence I said, you know, I'm bastardizing the problem space because I only live in a part of that space. I have no goal, right? There's a lot of things that we don't do, but we're experiencing this. So when I say like symbols chains and API compatibility, I'm specifically also referring to only the packages that we build, which obviously is not an entire distribution. So yes, of course. Yeah.
So the quick answer would be make your packages work with build compare, where we strip out things where we know that might change in the build, but don't affect further packages. And then you, in the build log, at the end you see a discarding result because it's the same. And if you have that often enough, you see that like 10, 20 times that the package got rebuilt, but it doesn't trigger the further packages because we discarded the result.
Yes, and I hear what you're saying, and I've seen this happen before. Not that I can influence it, but
we can tell you how to influence it.
In my build system, yeah, the problem is not so much that things are being rebuilt, but I think, well, actually, the unconditional rescheduling is not a problem so much as, you know, who cares? There's a bunch of build systems, and I just wait for a little bit, and we're done, right? So, yes, exactly. I think it's a thing that can be addressed, and it would be really interesting to see how one could address it. I have no personal problem with just scheduling and rescheduling builds. That can happen 6 ways. Like I said, we do updates, and we do extra packages for enterprise Linux. So every once in a while, we need to rescan those, repopulate and rescan those repositories, which triggers a rebuild for everything under the sun, right? So this is in our case. And pardon me for those that are on the remote end of the video, but you need to understand the Kolab is, you know, bouncing back and forth some emails with people that just happen to share calendars. Now, this is way more complex than that, but when I rescan the repositories, I trigger 15,000 builds just for some email and some calendaring. But it is 15,000 builds nonetheless, right? So the unconditional rescheduling, particularly projected onto that use case in the way that I answered that use case, so really my problem, right? Not an OBS problem, does create friction in the amount of resources that we can spend at building and the time in which we need it to happen. Yes, go.
But you could disable the rescheduling. I mean, it's a mode in the repository. Can you explain why you don't do that?
Well, I may have mentioned that we also find it a lovely feature. So,
I think what Adrian means is you can disable the triggering for cases where you just update your EPA tree and you don't want the initial rebuild. But if you change something, then it will start rebuilding again.
Sure.
So that's a possibility.
Can we make this session about his wishes and his problems, not what you can do against them? That would be awesome. Because I understand that you don't, or sometimes you are annoyed by too many rebuilds, and that's fine. Let's continue, please.
Sure. Thank you for that. But yeah, so one thing I've also noticed is, so the software that we write, for the largest part, is no ARC, right? Instead of specifically i586 or the emulated 64-bit that is x86 64. And so maybe this is a thing that I don't know how to do, but my no ARC packages are being built twice. One time for i586 and one time for emulated 64-bit. And this is something that I think could also be resolved. You know, it's a technical, and again, this is not a real life problem, right? I'm happy to spend some build servers on just running in a couple of circles. But it's an inefficiency, if you will.
there are no ARC packages which do the compile stuff within the build job, and on some platforms it fails. So if you, like Fedora do, blindly import no ARC built on x86 on any other problems, on any other platform, you don't see those issues. I talked with Fedora guys about this issue. They say, yeah, happens.
Right, so I'm not standing here as a Fedora person, right? That is just to illustrate my bias. Thank you. So I'm standing here as an ISV of an add-on repository. We're not building distributions.
Building a no ARC on all architectures sometimes makes sense.
And you certainly have a point. I'm not disagreeing with you. But like I said, we're not building distributions. So some of your challenges in building an actual distribution, you will encounter, you know, your Go's and your no-ARC packages that build differently on different architectures. You will encounter those. You have a completely different use case and a completely different problem space to address than I do building, let's say, RunCube. Building a package for RunCube is clearly no ARC because it's a bunch of PHP, CSS, and JavaScript. But it's being built twice, right? Yeah. It's just a little inefficiency. I thought I'd throw it out there and see what bounces, see what sticks. Yeah, so maybe a little bit more specifically to my deployment of the OBS. So I've needed to fork some of the other Git repository, and then I needed to create a system that is the odd one out within our environment, because all of our environment is licensed and supported Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Not surprising, I suppose. So I have one openSUSE system throughout my complete universe of my data center, and it's the OBS system, right? That's the openSUSE system. It's not being updated. It's not being patched. It is not being managed. It's not being monitored because it's the odd one out. And running in that amount of circles for us is quite costly. We're a small team doing an excellent product. We're not a small team paying specific attention to specific systems for the love of it, right? So a little bit more to what we've patched and why we are therefore also not updating the OBS or the system that it runs on. So, like I said, we're a small team. We have a small infrastructure, even though there's hundreds of systems. And we have deployment requirements for integration testing and quality assurance that make us have a copy of your average mirror. So we have Debian on there, we have Ubuntu on there, we have Gentoo on there for some appliance building, we have Fedora on there, we have CentOS on there, and we have SUSE and openSUSE on there. And this provides us with a nice ability to rsync once and then repeat that distribution within our infrastructure. It gives us a tree that is the exact same as you would find on a mirror. The OBS, however, demands a different layout of such trees. So what we do is we have this 2.5 tera LUN that is specifically just for mirroring content. And like I said, we rsync there. Now, this system that does all of this and then serves it to the internal space is, of course, an enterprise Linux system, a Red Hat enterprise Linux system, to be more precise. So it won't run the OBS, right? I've tried to do some packaging of the OBS to make it available for an enterprise Linux host, and I've failed to spend enough time on it. So technically possible, not getting done is the conundrum here. So how do we make these repositories available to the OBS? Well, I would have loved to see something like download on demand actually function. Clearly, just hit my internal mirror like everyone else does. But it doesn't. So now I need to make that 2.5 tera of mirror content available to the OBS in some way. Whether or not it's the right choice, you can make your judgments and laugh at me. I mount it over NFS. That being said, the hierarchy of what is on a mirror being different than what the OBS expects to be available makes me write scripts that link the content out of the mirror into the hierarchy that the OBS expects, and then I trigger the OBS to start rescanning. In order to avoid needing to copy or maintain 2 copies of 2.5 terabyte worth of content. That being mounted over NFS exposes some of the problems that may or may not be specifically associated with some function calls in Perl. So this is the fcntl use or flock use. One of them is network capable, one of them is not networking capable, and guess which one is used throughout the Perl code. So this is one patch that I've needed to write, and I think I've submitted it upstream, at which point one of you, possibly, who is here in this room, may have said my use case was not supported and therefore my patch was not accepted. Which I find, you know, entertaining. That's a no answer where I was expecting a how question in return. I'm perfectly willing to entertain developing OBS and patching it and contributing my patches. I'm a free software lover, right? So I've been in this for over a decade, but my patch not being entertained purely for the sake of my use case not being supported invalidates the adoption of the OBS throughout the entire ISV space, I hate to say, for where they already have their mirror and they need to mount something. And whether you do that over cluster or NFS or whatever networked file system, you know, just some of those conundrum space. Anyways, it bounced. Maybe I need to resubmit it, but then I also need to rebase it. I have a good repository someplace. Was it actually one of you that was proposed this patch, like do not use, I forget whether it was, whether you use fcntl and that failed for me, or whether you use flock and that failed for me, but one of those two is wrong and the other one is right. But okay,
it's most likely it was Michael Schröder. He's not here, but
yeah, too bad. Okay, so what else can I say here? I have some random notes that I collected over quite a few months because I knew that I was going to have this presentation. So everything that I noticed that was awkward, I dumped into a text file. And then I decided to do something new and not have any slides. So part of my scanning my own notes. There's some minor annoyances, I suppose. I'm sorry? Yeah? Okay. So OSC, the command line utility, and specifically for OSC build, requires sudo, but the RPM doesn't actually require sudo.
It recommends it, I believe, because you can also use SU.
That's fair enough, but on some of the scratch systems that we do, and I'm actually specifically speaking to the Docker space, right, where the base image sent us doesn't include sudo, it starts failing even though SU is available. So
it should fall back to SU, but maybe there's a bug.
What it should hypothetically, and what happens in real life. So, like I said, minor annoyances, it requires sudo, but it doesn't require sudo. I have no preconceived way to indicate trust when you do an OC build, you can do the -- no verify, but still the packages that I download from the target system that I'm using from the OBS server, there's no way to pre-indicate trust.
Actually, you can. You just need to put the public key from which they are signed into the repository, and then OST fetches it.
That's the -- no verify or the trusted projects?
No, you can.
Neither.
No, you don't need that. You just need to have the signing key on it. Like if you run OSCH-H and build, then you will see it tries to get the signing key, and if it can do that, then it verifies it.
The way it works, OSC
But those are packet signatures that you're then verifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or in the case of Debian, I believe it's like repository signatures.
Yeah.
No.
The way it works, OSC is downloading the project signing key, and it's comparing it to with the RPMs which are supposed to come from this project, because the packages may not be downloaded via the API, but via some mirror. So if these both keys needs to match, and then it doesn't complain. But as Derek said, you need if you import the binaries, they are not built in this build service, then you need also to import the signing key, the public part only, of course.
So, please allow me to try and reiterate and see if I understand correctly. There's one part that is the trusted projects against an OBS server, and another part that is the GPG signing.
Yep.
Of the individual packages or the repository as a whole, as might happen in the app space, right? So what I'm specifically speaking to is the one that I cannot bridge with a -- no verify. And I can skip the GPG signing key checking, but I cannot skip the dialog that is the do not trust this project, trust this temporarily, or permanently trust this project.
Well,
the 0, 1, 2 list, that is a dialog. Yeah?
Find a bug or just put it into the text file yourself.
Like I said, minor annoyances because I can do subshells, and so this runs in an entry point for a Docker container, and so I can say sleep 10, echo 2, and then pipe that through OSC, right? So I can take care of the STD in problem quite fine. Yeah. So another minor annoyance is I have a cron job that stops the entire OBS, then touches precisely 2 files, and I think we've had a conversation about this particular one as well. It stops the OBS, touches 2 particular files, because otherwise they make me run out of file system space, and then starts the OBS again. Standard operating procedure. Every night at I think after I go to bed, so like your 5:30 in the morning or some such. And those are the last events and last notifications files. I do have the OBS API delayed job running, but apparently it's not cleaning up these files, so they just continue to grow and grow and grow and grow. And then the way that the files are being used makes me run into memory problems. Hans.
Hi. Just so you know, lunch is ready. By no means consider this me putting him off stage or anything, but just so you know, because the time is carrying on ambitiously.
Well, I am out of time. Officially speaking, I am out of time.
You are, and I don't want to usher people out of the room, so feel free to stay, but just know that lunch is ready and available. But thanks for the dialogue anyway, I think it's useful.
Yeah. So, all right, to wrap this up, you know, some of the annoyances are mine, and maybe that's my personality or whatever is in between my ears or not between my ears, like I don't know a lot of stuff that probably I should be aware of. But yeah, find me, bring me a beer, or otherwise I go fetch you one, and we can discuss. Thank you.
Thank you.